I'm Heather Lawson, and I am with the district's crisis hotline. One of the parts of my job is to provide grief counseling with students. So I'm glad you are all here this evening, and we will get started just to give you an idea of what goes on when we're talking with our children, what things that you can recognize with your own children with grief. And we will be happy to answer some of those questions that you may have. Go ahead, Miss Ellen, to the next screen. So one of the things that happens with children is we have all sorts of reactions. We come up and one child may be in shock. In fact, that's usually the first thing that you'll see with anybody, with adults and children, is that initial shock and disbelief. It's like you learn this news and you can't believe it. In fact, they may go through that whole first day and not believe that that person has actually died. It may not be until the next night after they've gone to sleep, and then it's kind of like now it's the next day. Oh, that's real. It really did happen. So they may go through that first part of the day feeling like it's kind of surreal. It can't be. I don't believe it. And several times somebody may have to let them know, yes, that really did happen. Of course, you may see sadness. Some children may cry, but then you're going to have other responses too. Some people may be angry because that person that they loved and cared for died. Or they're angry at someone else because they didn't react the way they think they should. So even though you love and care about somebody else, maybe siblings start to fight because they have to show their anger somewhere, and so they take it out on each other. They may even be angry at the person for dying. Another thing that you may see is frustration. It's really like, why did that happen? What happened to them? And trying to figure out, what do I do next? There may be confusion. It doesn't make sense. And death doesn't make sense many times. We expect people who are very old to die, but then when somebody who's younger dies, why did they die? It doesn't make sense to me. And so throughout the whole time, they're trying to make sense out of something that doesn't really make sense. If you've had somebody in your family who has died, they may ask you why. What happened? It doesn't make sense to me. They may ask the same question multiple times, trying to make sense out of something. And while they're doing that, their brains are working overtime. So they get headaches, they get tired, they feel powerless because they couldn't do anything to stop it. They may even feel lonely, like, I'm all alone in this. One of the things that we do and why we go out and work with our youth in groups is because that helps them not feel alone, that those reactions that they're having are the same reactions other people are having. It may feel crazy and not right at the moment, but other people are feeling that same thing. So it helps normalize some of those reactions that they're having. They may feel shame. It may be one of their parents died, and so now they feel shamed because they don't have two parents. Or they may feel shame because they had said something to them and like, well, I wish you'd just go ahead and die, and they do die. Now that may be guilt too, but sometimes that does happen. Another thing is fear, because with a child has somebody that they care about, especially if they're in their family, what's going to happen next? Is somebody else in my family going to die? Am I going to die? In fact, today I was working with students who were in high school, and that was one of the things that came out, that fear, not that they would have a heart attack, but a fear that somebody else in their family might have a heart attack. So they're putting those fears onto somebody else. You know, who else might this happen to? What's going to happen next? Is it going to happen to somebody else in my family? They may feel just numb. I can't explain what's going on with me. I just feel empty. I feel numb. I almost call it like the walking zombies. I see that with many students that we work with, is they sit there with an expressionless face and they don't know what to do or what to say. And so they sit there, and that's okay. You need to let them know that that's okay. And then some people may even feel relief because that person was suffering and they finally were put to rest. Okay, so you're going to have all these feelings, and all those feelings may occur. And so they're going to feel like they're all shaken up inside inside of a snow globe. They're shaken by their emotions and they don't know how to respond to them. Go ahead to that next slide. So what's going to happen is you guys, as a family, it's how do I get through this? If it's a family member who's died, how do we do it? We're going to do it together and we're going to do it separately. And how people grieve is going to be different. Nobody's grief is going to look exactly the same. Their age is going to make a difference. And when we're talking with those students, that's why they sometimes get angry, because my grief doesn't look the same as yours. We have some students who want to talk about it, and they'll talk about this, and some may want to talk about gory details. We don't talk about gory details, but they want to know that. Some may cry. Some may even be inconsolable. Others may want to write something or draw, use art. Some people need to get up and move. Usually what I see with a youth is, at first they have that shock. It's like they're sitting there, they're staring, it's really quiet in the room. And then all of a sudden, I see this need for movement. It's kind of like, I had this shock, my body's getting ready, and now I've got to do something about it. So they need to move. Some people regress. That just means that they go back to something that they were doing earlier in their life. You see it a lot of times with our young children, where they may be have been independent, but now they're clinging. They want your attention all the time. Some people may laugh. And that's where I get kids to get angry with each other, because one's crying and another's laughing, and they're going, but it's not funny. It's not that they're laughing to make it funny. It's because that's their way of coping with stress. Another thing is, some may just be quiet. So you can see that there's all different types of responses. And we're looking at it, we need to look at their differences in their ages. Because a child who is under the age of 3, they're not verbal. So what you may see is, you don't think that they understand death, but they do understand that there's a loss, if that's somebody that was a caretaker for them. So what you need to do is make sure that you are giving them that chance to bond, that security, that safety. Okay, that's where they may definitely be a little more clingy. Okay. So if you see some of those signs of distress with those very young children, that may be what's going on with them. At that young age, up to about age 6, these are the kids that have that magical thinking, and somehow they believe that they may have caused that death. They may associate death with other events and places, like if grandma went to the hospital, everybody who goes to the hospital dies. That's why you need to be careful sometimes if we say, well, grandma died in her sleep, because they may come back and say, am I going to die in my sleep? And then have trouble sleeping because they're afraid that they may die in their sleep also. They may experience grief in very heavy but brief spurts. So they may have that severe outbursts of crying, and then seem like they're okay, and then go back into that severe crying again. They may not understand that death is permanent. That means that, oh, gee, grandma's going to come back for my birthday, or when is she coming home? Even though you let her know that grandma died. They may even forget that that person has died. Some of the things that you may experience again with that age is that fear of loss and abandonment. So you definitely need to make sure that you give them that security that they need at that time. You need to make sure that they understand that somehow they'll be taken care of, because that's where they need that reassurance. You can't make promises that you can't keep, though. You also may see that they may see death kind of like a gradual process. It's kind of like more dead. It's kind of like being, slightly dead to more dead. And I can't explain that any more than that, but that is one of the things that may happen with them. And they may have some fears about the pain that the deceased may have experienced, so they may express that to you. They may even see that death is caused by something outside, like maybe they were, said something mean and that caused that person to die. Okay. So that's going to be what happens at this age. When you move on to more of the school age children, you're looking at concrete reasoning at this stage. They really want to see death. It's as more, sometimes maybe superstitious. They may talk about ghosts at this point, and maybe hearing somebody, or they may do chants and oaths at that time. They may talk about, that's where they personify death. It's kind of like the grim weeper or the angel of death, and they may talk about that. They may begin to explore deaths of other family members. Someday, well, grandma died, someday mom may die. And they may believe that it will happen to other people, maybe not themselves, but to other people. They may have more of a fascination with death. That's where I say, talked about gory details. They may want to know the gory details of what's going on. Again, don't share gory details, just state the basic facts when you're talking to them. But that's one thing that they do. So again, they may start to have dreams about death. So if they're talking about that, you may wind up talking about their dreams and what's happening and help give them reassurance on that one. They may have nightmares. Again, sometimes they may see some of the facts around death as funny. And so again, they may laugh or make a joke. At ages, adolescence, 9 to 12, well, that's where you begin to get that abstract thinking. It's more realistic. They may have a larger fear of death at that point. And sometimes they see death as pretty much as unpredictable or sudden. Even if somebody's about to die, they may still see it as very sudden. They may see death as being painful. But they do understand death at that point. They understand that person's not going to come back. So they may have that fear of a void, that feeling empty. They may talk about the physiology of the death. They may want to view the body. They may have those questions. And so you'll see a lot of questioning at this age. As they get further into their adolescence, they get, it's becoming more like what an adult view would be. It's still not quite the same, though, so don't expect it to be the exact same as yours. But they do begin to become a little bit more philosophical about death. They can idealize that person who has died, especially if it's a friend or a sibling, kind of puts them up in a higher place. They may have more conflict because they're trying to do that independence. So they need that support, but they don't want that support at the same time. And again, their greatest fear may be that fear of non-existence. Again, they may start to cope with grief in a way that may be rather impulsive or unhealthy. Again, it's at that point you're trying to guide them in ways that may be a little bit more healthy. Go ahead and go to that next slide. Okay, so what do we do to deal with it? This is where you want to, as a family, to engage in self-care, because you're grieving and your child is grieving at the same time. So you need to do some things together to engage in self-care. One of the things that happens with the children is sometimes they feel like they're becoming invisible because you're dealing with the death and you're trying to handle all the things that are going on. So the child feels like I'm in the background and people are ignoring me feelings. So they may feel like they've lost that emotional support because you're in grief at the same time. So what they need is that protection. They may feel like you're trying to keep secrets from them because you don't want them to hurt. So they do want to be part of it. So let them know what's happening, especially depending on that age, so that they understand what is going on. You want to make sure that they don't become isolated. So keep those routines as normal as possible, even though your whole world has been rocked yourself. They may also have a sense of loss of trust because everything was okay and then a death occurred. So now it's can I trust somebody? That's why you want to be honest with them with what's going on and tell them what's going on. And even within some families, we all have our different family view of how we should deal with grief. Some families are very vocal and verbal and outwardly demonstrate their grief, and others are very conservative. And, it's more like silence. We don't talk about it, but they may need to talk about it. So give them that chance. What you want to do at that point is just listen to them. That's really all they want, is somebody to hear what they have to say. And again, they may have to establish a new sense of identity. If it's a loss of a sibling, then they're going to have a totally different perspective of what's going on and what their responsibility in the family is. So acknowledge their grief. You may have to create some new rituals and routines, but make it a family tradition, something that they can do. And you also just need to acknowledge that when someone is grieving, whether it be you or your youth, they may have trouble concentrating. The teachers, when I'm talking to them, I will tell them, you're not going crazy. And they're like, oh, thank God, because they can't concentrate themselves. And they'll start to do something and forgot what they were supposed to do. They don't know where they put the keys. It's because their brain is trying to make sense of everything right along with what the kids are trying to do. So as an adult, write some stuff down. If you need to remember something, write, because you're not able to concentrate that well either at this point. And above all, be patient with your child. Sometimes grief may take a little bit of time. Again, depending on their age, they may ask you questions over and over. You answer their questions, just be simple with it. And remember, that's something that's part of a reassurance, and it helps them try to grasp what's going on. And this slide has a thing like grief is like a carnival ride. When I'm talking with the kids, I usually say it's like a roller coaster. They're doing okay, and then they find out that somebody they're cared about dies, and they kind of go down. That big first drop. But then it goes up and down, and sometimes it may go on a loop because it reminds them of a death that somebody else that died in their family, or another one, or oh no, not again. Okay, eventually it starts to smooth out, and I'll talk about that at the end. But it could also be like a tilt-a-whirl. It's just things just aren't quite right. It's off center a bit. Or it may feel like a Ferris wheel and I'm stuck and I can't get off the ride. Okay. So what you need to do is just figure out, what questions do you have about what's happening? What's happening at that point, and where are you? What is it like for you? What is it like for your child? And what may happen next? I always ask the youth, well, what do you think is going to happen next week? That gives them the opportunity to explain what's happening. We talk about their hopes and fears at that point. This is where you ask them those questions, because they need to know what's going to happen. Because sometimes, especially if it's a loss of a caregiver, who's going to take care of me? The students I was talking to today wanted to know, well, how are we going to get our instruction? Who's going to be our teacher next? Those are the things in planning for the future. And if it's a death that's just occurred, it may be, questions about the funeral. And parents often ask, well, is it okay for my child to go to a funeral? And if your child says, I want to go, it's okay for them to go. But be aware that, you know what, if you're there and you can't handle it, we can step out and have somebody step out with that youth, so that you're giving them permission to do those things and to step back. Hope that makes sense. Next. Okay. Now, here are some things that we can do, because a lot of times we are at a loss of what to do with our children. I know a lot of times what happens is when somebody in the family dies, the parents send their kids home, back to school, and the kids are still grieving themselves and can't concentrate. But they don't know what else to do with their children, so they just send them on and say, okay, go. Some of the things that you can do with your children at home, and even a student asked me today, but I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget my teacher. Okay, I don't want to forget my grandmother. I don't want to forget my brother. One of the things that you can do is to engage them in an activity. This is talking about a beaded memory bracelet. There you're making a bracelet with your child or your family, and what you do is get various beads and put them on, and each bead will symbolize or remind them of special memories. You may have one color that may be that loved one's favorite color. Another bead may represent the color of their birth month. Another color may represent a fond memory. So have them create that. They can do it, and then they've got something that they can remember as a bracelet. Or you can do it as a necklace. But that's something that is an activity. And then they can name some of the things that they use. Another thing you can do with beads is even have, a fear that they may have, and name that fear or emotion that they had. Okay. Then another thing that you can do is create a memory box, a memento box. This one was pre-created that we have on the slide, but they can decorate their own box, use decoupage or color, and then you just have them place items that will help them remember the person who died. It can be a picture, It could be a ring, a handkerchief, cards, whatever it is that will help them remind them of that person, so that whenever they want to think about the person, they can pull that box out and look at that box. And they can have a special spot to place that box. That way, when you have somebody who says, I'm afraid I'll forget, that's something that you can do. Some other things that you can do to help you is like create a family story tree. And this one is you can have your family members create a story or a memory about the person. And, this is just drawing out a branch or cutting out something that looks like a branch or having an actual tree branch and then making leaves and putting those memories on a leaf. And each time you come up with a new memory, you can add that to the tree. So you can have that somewhere where they can just put that. And that way they'll have something that they can remember, or maybe even have stories to tell about it. Or if you don't want to do a tree, some people have made pots, and it's kind of like a heartbreak pot, where you can take a pot and then smash it, and then have somebody write a memory or even a funny story about that person. And then on each of the pot shard, then you can glue it back together and put it back together. Kind of helps you, and then you can go back and think about those positive things that you remember about that missing family member. So that's one thing you can do. You can also even do things like if it's at Christmas time and things are going on, you can take one of those clear balls and just have different colors of ribbon that maybe represent an emotion or a memory, and they can put that in there and state what each one of them is. And then they can hang that memory on the tree. Just some things you can do. Now, I'm going to talk a few things that we do have some resources, and
we also have full service counseling available to our students at our schools. Simply complete in the focus the full service referral form, and then we can get that connected to your school counselor, and the child can receive services there at the school. We also want to recognize that many of you may be employed with various agencies or various corporations, and there is employee assistance programs out there. And typically, those employee assistance programs, or EAP for short, provide counseling services for the parents or the adults, or even sometimes the children, through their offerings as well. So that could be another resource you may want to check out with that. If the grief is impending or impeding everybody's day-to-day activities, or even maybe that child's day-to-day activities, their ability to work, go to school, function normally, definitely reach out to your physician, talk to them about what you're seeing, what those issues are, and that way you can get additional services as needed. There is a wealth of information out there. We hope you have found today's information very enlightening. Let us know if we can answer any other questions for you. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll be here for a few more minutes to answer some questions for you. So Heather, we do have a question here. I'm not sure if you see it in the chat box. It says, my question is how to deal with a loss that isn't completed, like a parent not being in the picture, but may one day in the future. So it's grief to something that isn't final. I'm not sure if we're speaking about a parent being, no longer in the picture. They may be able to provide some information on that. But I'm thinking grief comes in all kinds of different ways. It doesn't just have to be the loss of an individual, a person dying or passing away. A divorce, a separation, any of those can also be grief too. Am I correct?
Yes. And what I can see on that one, from what I'm interpreting, is there's something called anticipatory grief, where the person has not died yet, but may happen in the future. And that is a grieving process as well, where you're preparing. Sometimes it helps because it's not as big a shock when the actual death does occur. But even though we say it's anticipatory and we're ready, I'm going to tell you right now, all death is sudden. When it happens, you still have that immediate shock and disbelief, and it's still a very intense moment at that time. But there's a difference between when something's very sudden, like it was a car accident, or even through violence, is that the grief that happens when something is not anticipated tends to last a little bit longer because they didn't have time to prepare. Whereas you have time to prepare, you still have that intense grief, but it may not last quite as long. And
Yeah, and
again,
Heather, we did get a little bit more clarification on that. So basically, the child doesn't have a connection with their father, but they want a connection with their father, but their father's not there. So he's grieving the loss of not having that relationship.
okay. And that is definitely a loss just as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where you need to listen. Just listen, because you're going to find out what their worries and concerns are, because they have a loss of something that they feel like they should have had in their life and don't. And they have a desire for that. Okay. So really, it's listening and acknowledging those feelings, because you can't fix it. So you're there to acknowledge. And yeah, that is hard. And it must be difficult to want that person in your life and they're not. So it's acknowledging it. And, we do a lot of talks with teacher. And one of the things is like, what worked best for you? Today I was asking the students, what are some of the things that people said and did that did not help? And everybody says, oh, you'll get over it. You'll be okay. But no, you may not be. Not right at that moment for sure. That's not what they want to hear. And so I said, well, what did help? And it's that shoulder to lean on, somebody to just listen to me. That's really what they want you to do at that point, is to acknowledge their loss, to acknowledge, yeah, it is hard to deal with a parent that's not there and you wish they were.
Absolutely.
So it's okay. And it's not final. And that's a grief that goes on. And some things that they may do. And they may be angry at that person at the same time that they're grieving them not being there. And sometimes that's hard, because it's like, well, I love the person, but I'm mad at them at the same time. And let them know that is a normal feeling. It's not unusual to feel that way. But again, acknowledging that emotion to them.
Thank you, Heather. That was some great information. I think some supports there with that. We have an additional question. How can you prepare children for the death of a loved one with a terminal illness?
Okay. Again, sometimes it's just letting them know that this is going to happen. And depending on the age, of course, you can explain what that illness is and what it's about, that process, because that gives them a little bit more understanding. Today, the death was due to cancer, and cancer is hard to explain to an adult, much less a child. So sometimes it's explaining a little bit, but then again, is that loved one is going to die. Are there some things you would like to do right now? Sometimes it is to write them a letter. Sometimes it is, you know what? I just need to be able to say goodbye, and giving them that chance. Right now, I think grief has been complicated because with people who are ill and dying of COVID and we're not allowed to be with our loved ones, that's extremely difficult, because we want to be able to say goodbye. We want to be there for them. That's why the hospitals, when they don't let you in, let you know that somebody was with your loved one, that they were there holding their hand. So it's being able to say, okay, and goodbye. And again, some of those memories, because again, you're establishing some family traditions at that point and saying, here's how we can honor this person when they do die, and give them a chance to even participate in some of the things, rituals that we have. Is there something that you would like to do or have them say at, if there is a memorial? Uh, this past week, we had students who wanted to say goodbye to a student who died suddenly, through an accident, and they created their own ritual. And, fortunately, the school was able to give them that chance to do that. So it was their opportunity and they were allowed to participate. Okay, so Angels for Allison is a group that was founded by uh, parents that lost their child due to an accident. And it helps with burial funds for parents who are not able to afford those funeral costs. And that is something that we help with at the school level. Sometimes the hospitals will make that referral to them, but if it's a student who is in our school system and the family is in financial need, uh, we can make a referral to that agency and they can help with, it doesn't pay for all the funeral costs, but it does help. And for some students, they actually, some people, if they want, they have a couple of the cemeteries that have donated some plots. And that helps definitely with the cost of burying a child, especially when we're not ready. Because if it's a death of a child, you're definitely making decisions that you don't want to make at that time. And, so we do try to support our families and parents that way too. And there is a grief organization out there. It's called Doogie. And I think it's
The
Doogie
Dougie Center.
D-O-U or Dougie, not Doogie, sorry, Dougie, D-O-U-G-Y.
Mhm.
And if you look that up, you will find that they have a lot of resources for parents and what you can do with your child at that time. If you do have further questions, again, you've got our website there. And again, if you look on our website and find the crisis hotline, that is a number. I'm usually answering the phone. Sometimes Ms. Menendez is, or we have a couple of other people, but you can call to ask further questions at that time too, because sometimes this is a lot of information at one time. So we want to make sure that we're there for you and can answer the questions that you need. I do thank everyone for their participation today. And I do again apologize for being kicked off there.
Well, thank you so much for your time tonight. And thank you, everyone, for coming and giving us your precious time tonight. I hope this information was helpful and you take something away that can help your family during what I know is a difficult time.